We are not going to repeat all the previous steps we have taken to arrive at the concept of social morality. A quick reminder must be sufficient. I just want to remind you that the sphere of abstract justice shows us a person who expresses his freedom in a property. That implies a negative relationship to other persons who are excluded from that property. Then we found a positive relationship in the concept of the contract. However, a person can try to express his freedom by breaking the contract, which introduces the concept of injustice. We started with abstract justice and ended up with injustice. Why? Because property and contract do not fully express the nature of freedom. Property and contract do not fully realize, i.e., do not make personal freedom become fully objectified. The result is a contradiction between my freedom and the contract I have made but can always break as well. Therefore it seems that we need to talk about subjectivity, which is the concept of a free individual being responsible for his actions and recognizing himself in the world of his actions. Our actions show intentionality, we aim at realizing the good. That at least is the purpose of our exercise of freedom. We do not control, however, all the circumstances of our actions, nor do we control the effect of our actions. We started with a subject trying to intentionally realize the good, but we end up, yet again, with a contradiction. Our purpose is the good, but evil can result. The good is merely an obligation and not a reality. Let us now turn to paragraph 513 and discuss the nature of Hegel's concept of social morality.
So there we are, the concept of social morality, or die Sittlichkeit. That's above and beyond morality and the sphere of abstract justice. So what is Hegel saying here? Let me put myself in the corner. Die Sittlichkeit ist die Vollendung des objektiven Geistes. So social morality is the completion, the fulfillment of the idea of objective spirit. So human subjectivity that is totally objectified, recognizes itself in the reality that it has created itself, that is fully at home in the world, and not just as an individual subject, but as a true member of a society, of a people. So it is the truth of subjective and objective spirit itself. So, social morality is the fulfillment of whatever we can say about our individual subjectivity, but it's also the truth, the complete exposition or realization or expression of the objectivity of spirit, of the world as a spiritual world. But yet we have a problem. Die Einseitigkeit von diesem ist teils seine Freiheit unmittelbar in der Realität, daher im Äußeren der Sache, teils in dem Guten als einem abstrakt Allgemeinen zu haben. So what is he saying here? When we reach social morality, then we still have a one-sidedness in that concept. On the one hand, we say we express freedom immediately in reality. We have property, we have a deed, we have something we act upon, we have the good as the abstract universality of all the things that we want to do, connected to our purposes. That's the one thing. So we have something like a transition between my freedom and the world that I enter with my freedom and change with my freedom. On the other hand, we have the good as this abstract universal, and we have this immediate expression in reality. So that's the inner contradiction. Die Einseitigkeit des subjektiven Geistes ist gleichfalls abstrakt gegen das Allgemeine in seiner innerlichen Einzelheit selbstbestimmend zu sein. Subjectivity, subjective spirit, that is that we have a individual interiority. I'm not sure what the correct English translation should be. We have an innerliche Einzelheit, an individuality within ourselves. We determine ourselves. That is the idea of subjective spirit. we are the source of our self-determination. So that was subjectivity, and we had the other, one-sidedness of morality. On the one hand, freedom immediately within the reality. On the other hand, the good is something that I purpose to achieve. So when we first start with social morality, we have this imbalance between these two elements of social morality, and that is subjective spirit. I want to determine myself. That is the nature of freedom. I determine myself. I determine what I am. And on the other hand, the transition between my freedom and something beyond it, the thing, die Sache. So we have this world in which we try to find ourselves as free beings, and we have this inner world in which we try to determine ourselves as free beings. So at the outset, social morality should be able to lift this contradiction, to have a real synthesis of these two contradictory sides, subjective and objective spirit, determining myself and finding myself within the reality outside myself. Diese Einseitigheden aufgehoben, so if we try and lift the one-sidedness is exactly what is keeping these two extremes apart. That is exactly what constitutes the contradiction. When we can get rid of these Einseitigkeiten, then we can see and then we can achieve a concept of subjective freedom as universal and reasonable will that is present within the consciousness of singular subjects, but it knows itself as universal. So what does this mean? Subjective freedom should be developed into something more universal, not just individual. When I try to determine myself, I do so on the basis of my rationality, and my rationality implies the rationality of others. So my self-determination will be in accordance with what is rational for the whole society of which I am a part. In Hegel's parlance, he can say, der an und für sich allgemeine vernünftige Wille, so the general or universal rational will that is in itself and for itself as such, so it knows itself to be the rational universal will, that comes into my singular consciousness. I know what it is, and I exercise that within my own individual and private life. So my decisions about my freedom are not driven simply by my inner needs or impulses or desires, but they are driven by this consciousness, this awareness of what is truly universal and rational in itself. In Hegel's parlance, therefore, we can say the universal will becomes conscious of itself within an individual. So you see that is saying just about the same. I am aware of the universality and reasonability of the universal will and the rational will that is above and beyond me, and I act accordingly. But the same thing can be said in a different manner when we say the universal rational will exercises itself, comes to self-consciousness, becomes self-aware, is exercised within my personal life. So, once diese Einseitigheden aufgehoben sind, when these one-sidednesses are lifted, then we have a subjective freedom that is as such universal rational will in itself and for itself. Der in dem Bewusstsein der einzelnen Subjektivität sein Wissen von sich und die Gesinnung wie seine Betätigung und unmittelbare allgemeine Wirklichkeit zugleich als Sitte hat. So now we have the introduction of the concept of Sitte, which is, let's say, the objective social morality, the social morality that is very concrete, very specific, and is valid for a specific people, is universally valid. That is just an immediate universal reality. So it's the way we do things, it's the way we have been raised, it's the common values that we follow and that we exercise. It's the general rules of our behavior as they are given through our upbringing. Now that is the way this universal rational will is present in our consciousness. Nobody has to discover, first of all, as a philosopher, what his universal rational will actually means. But whenever we follow the dictates of our parents or we follow general social rules, what happens actually is that this universal rational will exercises itself through these Sitte, these mores, these general social values and rules of behavior, like it is something natural, something given. That is why it's called an immediate universal reality. Immediate means not the product of reflection, it's not something that we necessarily have a concept of, but it's real, it's working, it's part of our determinacy. So on the one hand we have this self-determination. I have to determine myself who I am, what I'm going to do, what my purposes are. And at the same time I find myself embedded in a culture that drives me towards certain values and certain forms of the exercise of my freedom. And there's no escaping from that, and we should not be escaping from that. This is something good. This is the way the universal will has made itself into a reality, a Wirklichkeit that really works and that is present as the Sitte. So self-conscious freedom has become nature. It has become a second nature to act in a certain way. It's like a natural determinacy from the outside. I can't do anything other than this because that's the way I've been taught. That's the way I should be acting because these are obligations that are valid for all people. That's something that I have been trained to do. No matter how you phrase that, there is something that has the character of a nature, a natural world, which of course is a secondary nature. It's not governed by the laws of nature. It's governed by sociological laws. That is the introduction of this concept in 513. Next time we will take a look at 514 and talk about the fact that this is merely nature, and that means that it's the spirit of a people. It has a specific time and place and cultural determinacy, and which can change over time, which can change historically. And how is that related to the individual persons that make up that people? That's the subject of paragraph 514. We'll talk about that next time, probably next week, maybe this week, but probably next week. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.
Let us now summarize what we have found in this lecture. The concept of social morality is the result of all the deductions in abstract justice and morality. Social morality is a concept that refers to a shared life of a community, organizing a certain manner. A basic principle of this organized community is the unity of universality and particularity. That is not an ideal, but a reality. The concept of freedom has now reached the stage of its objective existence. It is no longer abstract, nor does it show the supremacy of my particular freedom, which is the principle of morality. There is a new unity of subjective and objective spirit. What we have called the good in the sphere of morality, was still merely a formal concept and implied an obligation. But now in social morality, this good has become a living reality. We now have an organization of our social life that is universal and rational in itself. It goes beyond and above our individual freedom. However, only when individuals in their self-awareness and in the exercise of their freedom recognize this and think and act in conformity with it, is the universal and rational will a reality. Individuals make the universal a reality. And at the same time, that reality as universal is more than just the sum of these individuals. All social morality can be viewed therefore from an objective and a subjective viewpoint. It is very easy to illustrate this. Let's consider the institution of marriage. Two individuals enter into a marriage by their own individual free will. And yet the concept of marriage goes beyond their individuality both in the legal ramifications and in the conceptual meaning of marriage. Marriage is only a reality within the self-consciousness and actions of married persons. And at the same time, the concept of marriage is more than just the self-consciousness and the actions of individuals. So now we have a beginning for our analysis of Hegel's social philosophy. Thank you for listening. See you next time. And be wise and be nice.